So we just connecting to YouTube. It takes a while for some reason. Yeah. Okay, we're live on YouTube, and hi everyone. So we just connecting to YouTube. Takes a while. Yeah, hi everyone. We are talk, and we are meeting again as a part of our online program of called Get Real, about housing and new forms of coexistence. And today is our 10th and the last meeting within this discussion. And the series of discussion takes place as a discursive platform within the framework of our ongoing project called Critical Mass. And just to say a few words about us, Talk is a curatorial collective founded originally in St. Petersburg in 2010. And we work as a nomadic platform between different geography, but also between different socio-political contexts. And I'm Anna Bitkina, and my colleague Marie Yates is also here. And we have a group of audience today, which are joining us through Zoom, but also we live stream in YouTube. And this talk will be recorded and later available in on our YouTube channel. And Talk is originally being founded as a multidisciplinary institution or organization, which is working between creative curatorial practice, visual art, and different forms of academic and social research. And through our practice, we're touching upon very different subject, and also kind of our practice is sort of a moving between historical analysis and political imaginary. And we often work outside of usual art spaces, so outside of White Cube. Our practices often takes place in open locations, in different non-artistic institutions, often in educational and public institution and public spaces. And we work a lot, especially within our project Critical Mass, with post-Soviet conditions in Russia and former Soviet Union territory, and public space in modern cities, collective memory, transformation of social and political institutions, complicated relations between local government, citizens, and different actors of complex urban and city policies is always also in within our focus. And said that back in the days, Critical Mass became this research platform for all these matters connected to the transformation of urban territories, and St. Petersburg being always our sort of a research ground. But we, within this project, we select in different issues or different matters that are very local to St. Petersburg, but also very apparent and very typical for mega cities in other geographies. And the project is divided into seasons, which are naturally break into like 2 years period. And now we are focusing on housing matters, or question of housing, and different formats of coexistence within urban reality in changing socio-political conditions. So this is the 5th season, and as I mentioned, this series of discussion took place within this 5th season of Critical Mass. And under the umbrella of this project, we unite not only this discursive component, but also educational, because we also conduct, as a part of 5th season of Critical Mass, online school of new forms of coexistence. And today we have our speaker, and Masha will talk a little bit more about the more details about focus of Get Real discussion, but also present our speaker.
Yeah, thanks, Anya. The Get Real discussion series appeared as this emerging instrument to continue with the 5th season of. I'm out.
Oh, you're out.
Okay. Sorry. No, my computer has behaved really badly recently. So the online discussion is a certain way to continue serve as a discursive program for the season, and a tool to discuss really emerging issues that are related to housing. And the COVID-19, I think, was this global problem that not only was a problem as a pandemic by itself, but also unveiled a bunch of different failures of contemporary social institutions and structures. And the issue of housing, of course, is one of them. It's a major issue that's concerning global populations. And we decided that we will connect not only the contemporary processes that are related to housing, but also take a look into historical issues that also deal with the housing question, and also take a very kind of close look into different historical and contemporary cases of housing deprivation, housing demolition, various housing programs that took place both in capitalistic and socialist societies, how housing issues and systems transform when a society moves from capitalist society towards neoliberal society, from socialist society to capitalist society, and what is this kind of battle between businesses, governments, and people in the end, and how it is reflected in different countries. And the geography of the series has been pretty diverse so far. So we talked about Eastern Europe, we talked about Baltic countries, we also discussed the issue of Israel and Palestine. We, of course, talked about Russia. And a little bit touched upon the American context. And now we're going to a little bit of kind of a different geography. So we're gonna land on the territory of Turkey, Hong Kong, and Syria. And I would like to introduce our speaker, brilliant Merve Bedir, who we're super happy to have tonight, and I would like to introduce her. She's an architect who is based in Hong Kong, Shenzhen, and her ongoing research examines infrastructure of hospitality and mobility, something that's, I think, of high importance at the moment. And a second line of her research follows the human and non-human relationships in the context of ecology and cybernetics. Merve Bedir is an adjunct assistant professor in Hong Kong University Department of Architecture, Division of Landscape Architecture, and she's also a founding partner of Land and Civilization Compositions. She's also a co-founder of A Formal Academy. It's an experimental school program in Pearl River Delta region, and a founding member of Muftak Workshop that focuses on kitchen as a cultural space in Gaza and Steppe. And Merve is also a founding member of a Center for Spatial Justice in Istanbul. She holds PhD from Architectural Engineering Department in Delft University of Technology, and a BA in Architecture from Middle East Technical University in Ankara. So Merve, with such a introduction, citing all of your different hats, we're very happy to pass the floor on to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for this introduction. Thanks a lot for having me for the conversation. And uh, uh, yeah, I mean, I've been actually thinking. Well, we have been writing to each other maybe the last 3 weeks, and then we have been trying to narrow down the focus, especially like I know you are pushing me to focus. So in the end, and especially because yeah, I mean, maybe we can open up more conversation during the discussion, and also because I'm on the one hand an academic, and on the other hand a practicing person. So I find it very.
No, it's okay. Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, it's asking me if I'm accepting to be recorded. So so for me, on the one hand, Hong Kong is a very interesting context, which I've been in for 4 to 5 years now. I've been living in. So I very much. I mean, the topic of housing for me is very much related to my daily life, myself. Because housing at the end is about shelter, it's about protection, it's about inhabitants, it's about daily life, it's about your income, it's about your social status, everything. I mean, once you start talking about housing, you're actually talking really, I think it kind of creates this intersection of everything in a way. It can go through law, policy, all of these issues. So that being one reason, and the other reason is that because Hong Kong is such a complex place, well, like everywhere else, but it is fascinating for me. So I've been trying to focus my presentation more to Hong Kong, more and more to Hong Kong. I will give a couple of examples, but I will just touch upon them very briefly, one sentence in each context, just to create a sort of a comparison. And then the other topic that I'm really interested in is, maybe we can take it as a metaphor, maybe as an allegory, but in a way, this notion of casino urbanism. And the reason that I talk about casino urbanism is well, I mean, Pearl River Delta region itself, or shall we say Greater Bay Area, is, I think, where we really see this kind of wild, sort of almost like gambling sort of urbanism. And what does housing mean in that context is very interesting for me. But also in a way, it was also a topic for me, this kind of casino urbanism in relation to casino capitalism, which is used as a term by Henry Giraud, a sociologist, and also Susan Fringe, if I'm not mistaken, an economist based in New York. Both of them talk about casino capitalism. Henry Giraud talks about casino capitalism in terms of how capitalism creates these discarded humans, disposable humans. And then Susan talks about casino capitalism in the context of financial economy, the evolution of financial economy, and the influence of Asian banks, and the banks getting more involved in the, let's say, unregulated market, and then going more towards investment rather than commerce. So these topics I will touch upon here and there, and then I will try to, let's say, that kind of holds the discursive background, and then also the let's say, I will focus on one project in particular from Hong Kong, but I will also try to give you a background, again, as I said, quite informally, so that we can actually create, let's say, a kind of basis for discussion. And as I said, I will try to keep it as much as possible informal, and as less as possible academic sort of talk, so that we can actually just talk about it. But I do have my facts written down, so I will have to look at my notes once in a while. So let me start with sharing my screen. So this is one of the beautiful photos by Michael Wolff, who is a photographer who lived in Hong Kong for a while. for a long time, actually, and he has these cities series. And this one is, this series from Hong Kong is called The God of Land, the God of Land, Soil, Earth, Tu Gong in Cantonese. It's of course a bad pronunciation, I'm sure, but I'm sorry about that. So this little statue, let's say, or shrine, is dedicated to the God of Land, and you can really find it in front of every apartment, in front of every housing block, because the idea is that the God of Land protects the land, and the initial the birth of it was, let's say, from the soil. So the God of soil, the God of earth. So peasants were using it, the agricultural workers were using it, and then you would use it in your house. And then at the end, you also find it in front of this real estate agent in Hong Kong, and it is, you know, it has transformed, let's say, in time to protect your real estate. The God of land, the God of soil, the God of earth becomes the God of real estate, the protector of real estate. So I guess, I mean, I think this says something about the context we are at, or let's say to introduce the context and to begin with the context. The evolution of God of soil becoming the God of real estate. So from here I will, so basically what you see in this in front of this real estate agent, you also see in front of my apartment. This image is actually from New York Times, from Reuters, and it shows one of the let's say subdivided housing units in Hong Kong. I was asking actually the doorman, the security guard at our apartment, and I know he works six days a week. I was asking how much he makes per hour. He said $4.8 Hong Kong dollars. So this means almost like 50 euro cents, and you can convert it to you know, different currencies, if you will, in order to, let's say, create a comparison. And then I was checking the average minimum hourly wage, what it should be in Hong Kong as it is calculated. It should be $7 Hong Kong dollars. So he makes, let's say, a little more than half of it. And he works 6 days a week, and he works 12 hours a day. And he's not an isolated example. There are several people who work like this in Hong Kong. And for me, it's important to give this as an example because it actually gives a, you know, it gives us, it makes an image in our head in terms of like what kind of condition people work in and live in, and what kind of spaces then do they inhabit. Then this is the, let's say, popular quote unquote example of this subdivided unit, or in the case, I think in this case, it's actually even what is called like it can even count as the cage house, as it is mentioned again in popular terms, where, you know, your living unit may go as narrow as where you sleep. And again, these are not necessarily isolated singular cases. A significant amount of housing, let's say, provision is through these kinds of super small houses. And then and again, just to give you another example, like a 30 square meter house in my neighborhood in Tsim Sha Tsui costs about 2,500 euros, about 25,000 Hong Kong dollars. And that would be like a middle income housing situation, let's say, with a kitchen and a bathroom, and so you don't share facilities. It all belongs to you. In this case, in this example that we see on the screen, probably And yeah, here we see to share toilet and kitchen. This is a subdivided unit, so a subdivided house. There are several examples, especially in the north of the city, where houses are divided, let's say, quote unquote, illegally, but I would rather call it informally, where people, let's say, divide single apartment units into more units so that the rent goes down, and then there can be more people living in one house. But of course, this comes with all issues about health, especially, and also security, social security, and so on. Another example, I like this a lot because it kind of gives a striking view of what is happening, or what is the reality of living in Hong Kong. Average, let's say, car park, your house, the subdivided apartment in Hong Kong would be, let's say, 1/3 of the space. Or let's say, essential housing, let's say, average housing would be, let's say, the same size of a car park. And then when you go to other contexts, then you can see how much difference it makes. And then how much you need to earn to live in that house. I'm not going to talk much about it, but it suggests 20 times the median income here, according to the, this is again from the same diagram in the New York Times piece. Here it says 20 times. I found in different sources, it's, let's say, between 10 times and 20 times mentioned, let's say, between Hong Kong and other places, that you need to make, let's say, the median salary in Hong Kong, you need to make 20 times more in order to pay for your house. So that's why, it's, you keep living in smaller and smaller housing. And then if you look at it historically, well, if we don't, let's say, if we keep out the last 2 years, what has been happening, and if we look at, let's say, the period even until 2018, there is one major threshold, which is 1997 from my perspective, which is the handover time and the economical crisis that came with it. At that time, I mean, still, let's say, the British law, the common law, is existing in Hong Kong. But what has happened was in 1997, with the financial crisis, the public housing scheme of Hong Kong was suspended. And because it was suspended, there was, let's say, in time, there was not enough provision of public housing to people, let's say, who are in need of public housing. There was, let's say, less and less production of public housing, and then more and more people who are applying for public housing. And this created, let's say, a huge discrepancy between what is provided and what is needed. I'll try to remember if I need to make more, let's say, factual notes, just to mention if I need to make more factual notes. But maybe these I can also mention in the conversation later on. Yeah. So basically what was happening, on the one hand, we talk about, let's say, the coffin housing, the subdivided flats, and then smaller housing units. The coffin housing is also actually, technically, it's also called nano flats, if anyone wants to kind of look more into it. And then from what we know, let's say, in 2018, and actually I had found this from recordings of the parliament the other day. Rental stock of over 830,000 units that accommodated 30% of the city's population in 2018. So we are talking about poorest 40% of households can apply highly subsidized rental housing. Middle-income households are supported with government-developed flats that are sold at a discount of 60 to 7% via shared ownership arrangement to increase home ownership. So more or less, let's say we have these different ways of providing housing, subsidized public housing, subdivided flats, nano flats. But then we also know that what the government has been trying to do is to provide housing more with land reclamation and more with mega infrastructure projects. So this is the turn of, let's say, this is what has happened since the turn of the handover. Less provision of public infrastructure and more provision of, let's say, private development. And this is a little bit where I kind of get into start to get into casino urbanism, I think. And what do we mean with that? Mega infrastructures, meaning that housing is not just about housing anymore. It's about housing and commerce and consumption and recreation and infrastructure, meaning like transportation. So there is a famous scheme about Hong Kong, which is called transit-oriented development, where private companies, private corporations, they come in as developers who also pay for infrastructure, who actually provide infrastructure, by which I mean mostly metro, subway system. And then they also provide the shopping mall. They also provide, let's say, the recreation that happens within that. And then they also provide the housing. And then this always serves a certain level of income people, a certain social, let's say strata, certain social groups. So what has happened that then is Hong Kong government kind of focused more and more on this kind of housing development. This is the most recent case where we actually see this is in the New Territories in the north of Hong Kong. It's called Wang Chau. It's a neighborhood that's informally developed by community. So this is actually an example that I haven't mentioned yet, but I will touch upon it very little. So this is not, it's again not an isolated case. There are several of them where we still have in the green belt of Hong Kong, where people still do agriculture. They actually also have their housing within agricultural scheme, within agricultural land, let's say. But because they don't own the land, they are actually in very insecure condition. Because they don't own the land and hence because they don't own the housing, eventually they live in this kind of vulnerable situation. So this is the last case where there's a private development going to happen in the north of Hong Kong, in the north of Kowloon, let's say, and the evacuation was finalized last month. Another example is the brownfields, as are called. And actually brownfields are nowadays, they are known as the logistic hubs that work between Shenzhen and Hong Kong. And you can really clearly see the border between Shenzhen and Hong Kong here. And the brownfields are all the orange dots that you see here. And what happens there is that these also show the smaller pockets that belong to certain so-called indigenous populations who have migrated centuries ago from the mainland and have been given by the colonial government, by the British government, the right to the land. So they collectively own the land. So the government, these actually work as pockets of exception where the villagers, the indigenous people who are the mainland Chinese people, they actually develop their own land themselves. And the government, Hong Kong government, doesn't do anything about it, just like the British colonial government didn't do anything about it. They had the right to the land and they decided themselves what to do with that. And the problem is that they used to be highly agrarian communities, and now these areas have been transforming rapidly into logistic hubs. and less people are involved in agriculture, and they are, let's say, working more in finance or more in the city center. So this also actually comes with a different model of, let's say, urban development. Why I'm telling this is because many people, advocacy groups, concern groups, they actually talk about brownfields, which the agriculture fields becoming, let's say, logistic hubs. They are actually pushing for these areas to be converted to new housing developments, public housing developments that are initiated by Hong Kong government itself. And this is a more detailed map of that. The blue areas you see are the brownfields, the logistic hubs. So basically what I'm trying to say, I guess, is like with all these small examples of informal housing, with brownfields potential of transforming to public housing, with land reclamation and private development, with subdivided housing, none of that. So in a city of 7.5 million population, we have a world of different, let's say, cases of housing and, let's say, collective living or individual living. And these all come with their own potentials, dynamics, and collapse of different regimes throughout history. So the example, I mean, the case that I really want to mention in the case of Hong Kong is the Lantau Tomorrow Plan. And Lantau is an island in the west of Hong Kong. It's this island, and I will tell about it. And as I talk, I really wanted to use the project images themselves as the way that the development department uses them, so that you see the kind of aesthetic that comes with the project development, with the planning, with the ideology of planning, let's say. So as I mentioned before, the land reclamation has been the major tool by the government, mainly because of the ownership scheme and also the ease of development that way. I mean, if you are, the word reclamation is a funny one, because you are actually taking the space from the water. You are not reclaiming anything. You are claiming it. You're kind of taking it. You're confiscating it from the body of water. You're creating space for yourself. So land reclamation, in that sense, technically it is right, but ethically it always sounds problematic to me. But in any case, this is a major land reclamation project that is, let's say, much bigger than any of its kind in the world. I will give the different examples, but the idea is basically to create these new islands almost everywhere you see in this picture. Between these two islands, and on this site as well. So the idea is to create a major land reclamation that kind of goes on the west side of the Hong Kong island. This is one of the other islands that kind of, I mean, what you saw in the previous picture was this island, and the other one is here. So pretty much everywhere here, the government wants to kind of create a big land. Basically, it wants to create land here and then create development possibility for different housing schemes. Another side of the, let's say, another site view of the land reclamation project. So the created islands would be around here in the middle. It relates to this huge bridge that seems like disappearing into the water, into the horizon, into the sea, which is the Zhuhai Bridge that kind of reaches to the mainland. And if we look, let's say, more on a graphic or a diagrammatic way, if Hong Kong Island is here, and here is the airport, if you have been to Hong Kong before, and then Kowloon side, the Shenzhen would be over in the north here, and then the islands that are, or the reclamation that wants to be created is in between all this area, this light blue, and then also on the north side, and then these are the existing ones, and some of them will be added. And the idea is basically to create like a new town that also has business, that has infrastructure development, and also has housing with 1,700 hectare units. And then also these numbers are always difficult for me to compare or scale, even because, yeah, it just becomes impossible because it's in such a large scale. Another way of showing it would be to create the land reclamation here, around here. This is another version of the plan, and then the kind of connection, infrastructure connection among different, let's say, pieces of land. And then the other, basically the background of the project is from 2014. It was upgraded in 2018. And then it always faced a lot of resistance from environmental concern groups, from social concern groups, and even, as well as financial, let's say, advisors or authorities, because, it would make less and less sense, and especially with the recent movement, and also with the COVID economy, it has made less sense, let's say, for all of this, let's say, public opinion. However, this year the chief executive, actually, she initiated the research to research and development plan for the island. So I wanted to show this because here you see, and here I'm going to look at my notes. The examples from Saudi Arabia would be like an 18,000 hectare city for 2 million people. Singapore's East Coast Reclamation would be 1,500 hectares. Another example would be Palm Jumeirah, which you see in this picture in Dubai, which would be 760 hectares. So what we are talking about is 1,700 hectares. So it would be like 3 times this. And it would mean more than half of public housing that are needed in Hong Kong would be, let's say, inhabited in the reclaimed or, let's say, Land Tao Tomorrow vision project. So again, as I said, I really wanted to use the project images themselves just to, see the kind of aesthetic that is mentioned, and because the project is promoted a lot with the idea of, let's say, both development and also conservation. And then you also see how much the idea of transportation is pushed or put forward. Another one, on the one hand, sustainability and conservation goes together with the idea of development, but then on the other hand, and actually I really want to show this one. Yes, so one of the things is the Pearl River Delta region, how Pearl River Delta region is now envisioned as the Bay Area, and how, let's say, the new plan sits with that here, and how it connects to the rest of China, and then also the positioning of it in relation to the Belt and Road Initiative, which is, again, another push from the government, both from Beijing and Hong Kong. So the project actually is seen in that sense vital and crucial by the Hong Kong government. And why I'm mentioning this is, again, related actually to the idea of casino urbanism and how housing is never just about housing itself, at least in the context of Hong Kong. Just one more diagram to show the new town, the Land Tao Tomorrow vision, and where, let's say, where am I? Here it is. Oh, well, the idea is to create this CBD area, Central Business District area, and the reclaimed area would be here, and it would provide, let's say, more than half of new housing, including public housing, to the city. But in a way, once you start seeing this kind of plan, you actually see that, again, housing is not just about housing, but this actually is beyond what is promoted to the public. So what we see actually is more of an infrastructure, a larger regional network development plan that is kind of promoted as a housing plan or a housing strategy to the public. This, I mean, the Land Out Tomorrow vision, together with public housing and let's say the Brownfield transformation, is maybe the most urgent thing that has been ongoing in the discussion in Hong Kong, and especially also, let's say, during the movement, it was even discussed if housing was one of the reasons, one of the motivations, one of the let's say background, let's say reasonings, or what kind of evoke people's movements, the inequality, and the unjust provision of housing. And that was one of the reasons of the movement. That was, let's say, assumed to be one of the reasons. So it actually came up a lot in the discussions in the parliament and outside in public opinion, that if, let's say, the housing provision is sorted or figured, there would be less dissatisfaction with the government and less, let's say, resistance to the government. So this is like maybe another discussion that kind of as a side point that comes into the debate. I'm going to skip these. I mean, obviously you see the airport, how the airport is part of the plan, the existing airport, but then there will be a reclamation site there too. This entire site here would be reclaimed. The famous, let's say, Disneyland resort and all the recreation areas that are kind of creating their own worlds, they're also on this side. And then there would be land reclamation on this side. So literally creating, let's say, a new city to the west of the city. These are promoted as, let's say, new development opportunities, again, infrastructure, again, transportation. And then this is the imagination of those new settlements. I mean, once you see this, and this is again from the same promotional or provisional material, and I especially wanted to use it because, like, this is for me shameful as an architect to see the kind of housing, the kind of living environment that is kind of imagined for people to live in. And it's a new town. You're doing something new. You're planning something new. You are, let's say, quote unquote, imagining a new coexistence, right? So how can you come up with the same copy of everything that you see in Hong Kong that has been developed in the last 20 years? Leave it aside. The same, I mean, the copy of everything you see elsewhere in the last 20 years, you copy it again in the new town development that you are envisioning for the future of Hong Kong. Another one that again comes in, and especially with these, I'm sorry for the resolution, I didn't realize it's this bad, but like you see this light coming in from here, it's kind of no facade, and then the heights, how it falls into, how it sits in the environment, it's kind of, you know, it just gives you no actuality, or like no there is no vision beyond this than what could mean in terms of square meters and in terms of the economy that will be generated around this. So to me, like when I look at these images, I can't think of human beings, I can't think of people, I can't think of inhabitants, or I can't imagine daily life, but I do imagine a kind of square meter calculation. So that's the way that the project is being envisioned. Conservation and development are always pushed together. And actually here, I mean, so some of the things I wanted to put forward from the concern groups. So these are the different particles in the air that are measured by different concern groups and that are put forward as the counter aspects of these new developments, how the different, the sulfur dioxide, the nitrogen dioxide, and actually, I mean, everyone in Hong Kong has become a kind of scientist by now, fact checker of, you know, air pollution data, but also all kinds of, let's say, realities of living in Hong Kong. And these are almost like citizen created maps that are produced, that are researched and produced by citizens themselves, or let's say by different collectives that come together to kind of who are, let's say, concerned about their environment. So in a way, here we start to see how different, how, let's say, how social connection can, let's say, create different kinds of outputs in a way. I mean, in this case, they're looking at air quality and what it can do to you. And really, for instance, in terms of air quality, PM10, they are serious fact checkers of PM10. NOx and SO2, like these three are the most important data that I find in Hong Kong that are checked by every environment concern group about every new development or existing development, or let's say checking brownfields and so on. There is this group called Libre Research Community, and they are, I mean, they really do research with crowdfunding, they do research with public funding, they do research with community funding. They are not, let's say, attached to any academic institution whatsoever or government in that sense. And they produce actually these super critical reports about different, let's say, realities of Hong Kong, be it the brownfields, be it this new development, or let's say other conditions that create, let's say, environmental issues in Hong Kong. So this is one of the examples of that. Another one is about dead zones, which is related to the lack of oxygen in water, the groundwater discharge and so on. So they actually look into, and this is called Ocean HK, Ocean Hong Kong. This is actually more of an institutional body where universities come together and check into, let's say, the amount of migration of contaminants or lack of oxygen in ocean water. So they are also seriously concerned about the land reclamation projects for the Land How Tomorrow vision. I'm trying to remember if I need to say anything else, because I think, I don't know, I'm not sure how much I've been, how long I've been speaking. I still have a lot of notes that I wanted to mention, but in a way, and what we see on the one hand is like, is this idea of sustainability and affordability that is promoted as, let's say, future living condition of Hong Kong. But then on the other hand, when we look at the actual let's say, research or concern from both the inhabitants of these places and the concern groups themselves, that we see quite the opposite of what is being promoted. But then what we understand from here is like is the appropriation of a certain discourse for the promise of a certain living environment, which doesn't necessarily actualize, which doesn't necessarily happen at the end. And in this case, so let me see if I have any other, no. Okay, so I will come to this. Okay, so one of the things, so the Lantau Island actually has a lot of, again, it has a lot of these inhabitant-owned land condition. So on the one hand, the government cannot really deal too much with the people who live in the land that they own. But then there are several of those smaller islands where you have, even like there's Sunshine Island, where you have one person living on the island and there's no one else. So those places will have less power to, let's say, or no power to even negotiate any compensation or whatsoever in terms of, let's say, how they will be moved away when this plan comes to realize. And actually, again, as I said before, because the Land How Tomorrow plan is not just about housing, it will actually be realized as long as it is financially viable. And here comes in the discussion of, let's say, if it is viable or not, or if it can work or not. And what the government is doing is trying to collaborate with the development banks, especially, to create the conditions of development and then bring in Hong Kong developers or mainland developers to kind of make those projects happen. In this sense, it is a kind of gambling in the, for instance, some of the concern groups actually propose to work with vacant development, vacant housing, or vacant buildings, which are, for instance, in the case of Lantau, there are several school buildings that are vacant that can be used for public housing. Just to show that there's an existing building stock that we can create, but that we can make use of. So, for instance, Greenpeace was one of them that made the research on school buildings that can be reused. Or Liber Community has done such research as well, and several others like Hong Kong Alliance and so on. The thing is, the one is that in terms of investment itself, what is known is that this investment will take half of the reserve of what is available in Hong Kong government, let's say, in terms of investment figures. So in that sense, it is gambling. It is gambling, on the other hand, as imagining the future of a certain place. Because it sits on a major infrastructural assumption that will kind of work within the Bay Area or within the Pearl River Delta region. It is gambling in the sense that we don't know who will come in. There is actually population. There is aging population, but there's no more people, let's say, coming from below. But then also, what is needed is not what is going to be provided in the new housing development, because it will be much more than it will be provided for middle income to higher middle income. But the people who actually need housing are the people who are in the lower middle income group. So there's a discrepancy there as well. So in that sense, it is also gambling. So that's why I kind of keep coming to this notion of casino urbanism, in the sense that, and this is not just Hong Kong government, this is also Turkish government where I'm from, this is also Qatar government, this is also UAE government, and this is actually also what other governments have been doing too. I was in the Netherlands last week, and I know Rotterdam is doing the same thing now. So this maybe I would kind of conclude. And this image, this is the god of land, the god of soil, in different contexts in mainland and in Hong Kong as well. Me and my students actually in Hong Kong University, we produce these images once in a while. You saw in the presentation, we produced these images for Contour Biennial last year or 2 years ago, for that Natasha Petreshin curated. I particularly wanted to use these where, let's say, the gods are bringing the buildings. And in a way, this is the kind of, let's say, wish for housing, where what we really need and what is provided don't come together. There's a lot of vacancy, but what we need is still not answered. And most of all, most of these schemes are actually covered, in the end, compensated by the people who live there, but they don't actually, again, respond to their needs. And in that sense, to me, that's like a perfect representation of a casino, or like the allegory of the casino itself. How you spend your money and what you expect and what kind of environment you live in. This is pretty grim picture of the housing condition, but it also kind of super realistic representation of, let's say, the envisioning of the city. With that, maybe I conclude. I think I spoke already too long, and then we can have a conversation.
Thank you very much, Merve. I really like the metaphor that you're using, and I think it's Also, so pointing, so, very much the point is because we know that casino always wins. And, people who are engaged in this gambling, they also lose, especially people that, and you also spoke about them, people who come from lower middle class, and people who are trying to buy, housing, maybe not for themselves, but for their children, and they get engaged into this mortgage schemes, and they also, in the end, many of them get like very small spaces, and spaces that will eventually just deteriorate very quickly. And it's like this slot machines, where people sit day and night and just lose their last savings. So that very much reminds me of this, and I think this is a beautiful metaphor. It's also a very scary one, but I think you're using it in a very complex way. And this is about terminology. And another thing, just very quickly, that I was thinking of while you were speaking about the term of reclamation. When we talk, it's very ambivalent in a way, because especially in urban activism, we talk a lot about reclaiming the city, and then it's a positive, and it's a term of solidarity, and it's a term of collective action when people and city residents want to kind of reclaim the public spaces, especially that were taken from them by the state, parks or some territories that were once aimed for public use, but then later, due to some land grabbing on the part of the state, were lost. So this kind of reclamation in this corporate capitalist terms means completely different thing. When a corporation, a business company, or a state just grabs this land that sort of doesn't belong to anyone and makes a town, an island, another this kind of capitalist lounge for those who can afford it, being extremely violent to other people who maybe live there or live around, or to nature itself. So I think it's also interesting how one term can mean completely different things, and we get so used to certain terms and take them for granted, and we sometimes actually forget about the etymology and where different terms come from. So I was just thinking that while you were speaking, and I think language is very important in analyzing the contemporary housing situation, and coming up with new terms is also very important, because it allows to kind of create new concepts that maybe describe the contemporary discourse in a more detailed and nuanced way. And I think that again, with your terminology and with this metaphor of casino, you kind of made an important step in that.
Yeah, and I think like the whole financial regime is also, it's producing this desire of casino, right? Or desire to gamble, desire to invest, desire to buy. So it's a really it's difficult to resist, especially if you're not able to understand all those processes that are happening, not obvious financial processes, because like in neoliberal conditions, it's very, you need to develop this sensitivity towards all these tricks, and you need to be like educated, aware, critical, and that's something you gain. Also, it's also a privilege in a way to have an access to this knowledge, right? To be able to digest it and apply it to reality. So it's but I think, of course, it's like this gamble is in every geography is different, and I think like if we compare, for instance, situation in the Netherlands, which you mentioned, and in Hong Kong, I think it's very different casino, right? And I'm also like really happy, like for instance in Russia, where economy is, I mean, real estate. It's like the maybe used to be the most stable currency. So now there are more and more information or studies or economical studies about this kind of this financial scheme of like, maybe it's not like this, maybe you have to think really like what is whether it is makes sense to invest into this. So it's kind of yeah, but maybe we can also, like, it would be great to know your take on solutions. So you mentioned few grassroots initiatives. So I also wanted to ask about this situation with using this vacant buildings, and how come they're vacant, and what do you think about decentralization, like urban decentralization as a solution as well?
One thing that I realize, well, first of all, there is indeed actually a lot of, let's say, both grassroots activism in a way, but also simply self-organization. You know, let's not call it activism, but self-organization of people. So there are actually a lot of things happening in that way, in smaller scale. The problem with Hong Kong, and actually maybe also Shenzhen now, that it's a super expansive city, and it happens mostly majorly by these big developers. So these smaller scale things, like, you need to really focus to see them. So one of the things that I really appreciate, actually, for instance, in Tsim Sha Tsui, where I live, what we see is that, well, because the properties are so expansive in a way, between one ownership or one rental scheme, I mean, between one rental period and second rental period, if there's like 2 months that are empty, there is for instance, there's a WhatsApp number that you can write to, and you can just rent a place for 2 months, because there are people who follow how long a place will stay empty, and they actually create this kind of network of use through these shorter temporal periods, let's say. So, I mean, this is a very small example of, like, let's say, like makeshift almost, or very informal way of organizing. Then there are those examples, like I just mentioned with Wang Chao, with the informal housing. There are people who live in the green belt, the agriculture belt, or really the green belt of north of Kowloon, the new territories, where people still do agriculture and still live collectively, but they don't have the right to the land and right to the housing. So they're kind of, in that sense, vulnerable. But the ways that they live in, and the ways that they kind of show as example, is actually something that needs to be followed, and unfortunately it's kind of diminishing. That actually can be followed as a way of coexistence, and as a way of living together, and as a way of, let's say, providing new housing. The other example is indeed the brownfield transformation. So this is, for instance, something that the government doesn't want to get involved with, because it's super messy, because the ownership belongs to the indigenous people. Indigenous people meaning they're not necessarily indigenous, they're actually from mainland, but the British called them indigenous. So this is a very tricky one, but I think it would actually be more useful to get involved in that, rather than, let's say, reclaiming, let's say, soil from sea. And actually, if you look at all the brownfields in the north, that would provide more or less enough housing for the demand, if you wanted to invest in that. And what's happening is that the larger developers, they are actually buying those lands in small bits, and actually with different names of companies, so you can't even trace them. So I think on the one hand, there are also other, let's say, NGOs that kind of take steps to mediate between people and government to kind of show the urgency of the situation and to kind of try to find models and ways of providing housing. But mainly the issue ends up at the in land, in the idea of land again. Because you can't solve the issue of land, you want to create land, and that's why you kind of claim it from the water. There's something in permaculture actually. If you don't produce soil, you don't need to exist. I mean, this is something that comes from landscape design. But if your existence should be meaningful, you should be producing soil. So if we look at the case of informal housing, they're actually producing soil because they're doing agriculture and they're providing, I mean, doing crops and so on. In a way, metaphorically, the people who are kind of looking into renting places every 2 months, that's also, to me, it's not directly producing soil, but it is in a way producing soil. But I mean, I don't know where this will all go. Really, I guess my investment or my sensitivity would be towards working on the brownfield sites in the north of Hong Kong, because they are actually terrible in terms of also environmental depletion and so on. So those are the places that I would focus on in terms of solution, let's say, quote unquote. If there's a solution per se, I would work more on the north side of Hong Kong where it gets close to Shenzhen and try to look for affordable solutions there, which I'm sure needs to be possible. But also with the COVID crisis, for instance, we actually haven't seen that the rents didn't come down. Housing costs didn't come down. So this is, to me, surprising. I mean, this is a city that has seen a year of protests and a year of COVID crisis, and the rent is exactly the same after 2 years. So this is, to me, shocking. So it really tells me like the economy is completely detached from people, you know, like whatever happens to people doesn't matter. The economy will run. That's actually very cynical, but this is, I mean, it's actually clear that, I mean, again, like the Libre Research Committee, for instance, they produced this thick report about how a kind of drawing a guideline in terms of how to transform the logistics hubs, the brownfields, to housing schemes. They just need to follow that, but nobody is doing it. So that's the problem. I mean, I think it's about agency and about creating the space for to respond to demand, let's say.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you also a term question. When you were starting to talk about this division of the small apartments, and you said that this additional division would be illegal, then you corrected yourself and you said they're not illegal, but rather informal. And it's also interesting how, we call illegal what has been pronounced illegal by the state. So I was wondering if the legislation in recent decades somehow changed in order to help corporations kind of, feel freer at the housing market, and make housing not only about housing, but mostly about their profit. Because normally, governments and businesses, and in this very good connection when it comes to, lobbying someone's interest, it also becomes legitimate and becomes part of the legislative system. So yeah. If there has been any significant changes in that, would be happy to hear about them.
This is actually something that, again, these organizations are pushing for, because what happens is in Hong Kong, like this transit-oriented development is a model that's promoted by Hong Kong, and it actually spread to the world from Hong Kong. Singapore took Hong Kong as an example on this, for instance. But the problem is that the ownership belongs to one corporation or the consortium of corporations. So in the end, you are giving ownership to this sole body. And you're not even, so in that sense, it's even problematic even in conditions of capitalism. Like, you're not creating competition, you are not distributing the revenue that's generated. you're not creating chances for others. So this is, for instance, again, the Liber group. They have been pushing, for instance, for Lantau Tomorrow Vision Plan. They're saying, okay, you're going to do it. At least give these to different companies. There are 4 or 5 different infrastructure investments there. One is about tunnels, one is about bridges, one is about metro systems, etc. So they're saying at least give them to different companies so that the revenue doesn't go to one big oligarch in a way.
Yeah, and how are they going to distribute those housing? Will it be like anything, considering social housing, or maybe for families with low income, or what is the quotas?
So that's something that I've been. Wait, let me find, because I found it exactly in order to mention it, give you exact numbers. 3 to 7 is so 30% would be public housing, but let me find the wait. So the idea was 1,000 hectares. Now it went up to 1,700 hectares. That's one, the reclaimed area. And then the finishing time will be 2035. They just started with the research and they put down 500,000 Hong Kong dollars. I'm trying to find sorry. Let me look in the presentation as well. Yes. So the idea is to produce for each 10 units, 3 of them. No, actually, 7 of them would be 7 out of 10 would be public, and 3 of them would be private. But the problem is that this is something that we will see in time if it is really feasible to achieve these numbers. 7 out of every 10 will be public housing. And they are also suggesting
that's very high. Yeah,
very high.
Yes. But I mean, that's the thing. This is not. It's not realistic.
Yeah, and it's also like also will create a particular strange division within this milieu of people with low income and with this people who bought those apartments or get mortgage to have them eventually, and this infrastructure investors that of course going to supply this territory with a particular type of supermarkets, restaurants, different recreation areas. So it's just those people that will maybe be able to, with lower income, be able to live in this apartment. They won't be able to afford maybe living in that territory, right?
True. I mean, so this is the thing. I'm with the new town developments, especially. I mean, to me, maybe Hong Kongers, like someone who has been living there forever, maybe in Hong Kong, they might not agree with me, but to me, as someone who has lived in different places, to me Hong Kong is a super mixed place. It's a super mixed city where different people really, they actually see each other every day. There are not so many places with like super segregation visible in the city. That's my observation, who came from outside, let's say. So in that sense, there are very few places in the city that you see different, let's say, profiles, quote unquote. There are places like Discovery Bay, for instance. That's really Discovery Bay is actually a new town, is actually a suburbia, a kind of American suburbia, you can imagine, that kind of sits in a part of an island that is very convenient for a certain population, mostly expats living in Hong Kong, and they really have their own world. When you go to Discovery Bay, it's a different world. But where you live where I live in Tsim Sha Tsui, you can really just bump into anyone from any part of the world. it's a super diverse place, different people with different income, different background. Everybody mostly speaks English, etc. But they also have 5 different accents. So in that sense, the problem with this new town, and that's what I'm curious about, how is it going to transform the social mix? How is it, what kind of environment it will create in terms of urban space itself? Will it be more like Discovery Bay, where everybody lives in their own cluster? Or will it be more like Hong Kong itself, or Kowloon, where I live, where you might bump into anyone and everyone? So that's actually what I'm really curious about. I mean, for instance, there's this thing about migrant domestic workers, which it's a kind of policy where migrant domestic workers, they actually live with the landlord. They don't have their own housing. And it's another thing that I didn't mention. They live in, they even live in the bathroom over on the washing machine. They live in closets. They live in rooms without windows. So this inequality is Hong Kong, but it is also the space where you know, on a Sunday, you go out on the street and then you just bump into each other, because the migrant domestic workers, it's their day off and then they're on the streets, and there's a space of encounter, you know. So that's it's not like they live elsewhere. So for me, there's a chance of making friends there as someone who doesn't have a domestic helper. I mean, for me, there's a chance to kind of meet someone and mingle and start talking and have a conversation. Where do you come from? How are you? How is it going? So I'm really curious how this new world now, how will it look like? How will it be? Will I bump into people there? How will the pedestrian walkway will look like? Will the migrant workers be there too on the street, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah.
But I have a question. Maybe it's maybe, I mean, you don't have answer to that, but this picture which you showed to us in the beginning to show us this kind of conditions of people that of a certain income live in Hong Kong. I guess there's many cases of such units, small units from like other places of Southeast Asia and also beyond. But and then it was a little boy lying on the bed, and I'm just thinking that, okay, so like family of 2-3 kids, they live in a small unit, and what happened like when those kids are growing up? So where do they go? Like what kind of understanding of living environment or housing they have in mind? So what is like do they reproduce the same way of being, or they really understand that they need to change something and live in different housing conditions?
And also the question, can they, you know, because maybe they don't want to reproduce it, but they are already in this reproduction circle, and it's very hard to escape from it and move to another level, because I think the social mobility is something that we're losing as a global society, you know, and social lift, something that our generation maybe doesn't have as much as the generation of our parents. So how would you address that also?
It's a very difficult one. I mean, because I have actually I've been volunteering for a solidarity group for the Filipino migrant domestic workers, and we just wrote all together. They have a collective, and we wrote together a chapter actually about their. I mean, they all together were like the first author, and I was the second author, where almost I was kind of interviewing them in order to create this piece. But what I wanted to say is I had the chance to kind of really, hopefully, to get to know more of the social environment, but also the legal background. So first of all, they come in with contracts with companies. So probably you would know this, maybe you know this also from Russia, but what I know is that especially from Middle East. So for instance, in the case of Filipino workers, they come from one of these countries like Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Qatar, and they get shipped almost based on a contract, on a periodical contract among these places. So when they come to Hong Kong, they don't necessarily have the right to anything. In the case of migrant domestic workers, they don't have right to permanent residence permit. They don't have right to claim space. And then if they don't have a job within 2 weeks, they get deported. So that's the problem. This situation I know very well because I've been volunteering. But in terms of other, let's say, migrant groups, or let's say more lower income groups or people, I shouldn't say groups. I'm not that knowledgeable about, let's say, the kind of social mobility on those terms. So I don't really know what really happens in terms of the improvement in their condition, let's say, in terms of housing or otherwise.
Yeah. We also have a question from the audience. I think it's the last question. So the question is if the pandemic has somehow affected any norms of kind of square meters that are how do you call it, allocated to a person, and if there is any such a term or a concept in Hong Kong as a certain amount of square meters per person. Are there any like standards that are being used for new construction sites? Like, is there a minimum amount of square meters that a person kind of should be allocated to, should have the right to use, you know? No,
I'll start with COVID.
Yes.
That's the easy one.
Yeah.
Because we really went back to camps in a way. The bare life, shall we say.
Yes.
Because I mean, I traveled twice, and once I had a chip wrist that I had to wear with me. I was able to do quarantine at home, but I had to wear the wrist band through which they were basically checking if I'm at home. And then the second time it was a hotel quarantine. So basically these hotels are now like typologies of living. But then there's also this kind of other camp, which is the government camp. They are in different places in Hong Kong. And they actually make you think of the time that the refugees were coming in from Vietnam and so on, because they're very much, in terms of typology, they're actually following very similar patterns. But these are quarantine centers, quarantine housing, quarantine camps. And they are provided for, Hong Kong government acquired enormous privileges during the time of COVID for itself in many ways, and this is one of them. What they do is, like, if there's one case in one building, they immediately they kind of lock down that building and they take everyone. There are children who couldn't get breastfed because the mothers were taken to a different camp and the children were taken to a different camp. I mean, we are in which century it is,
Yeah.
It's still happening. And there are several things around it. I mean, there's also racism around it. There are so many things to discuss. So now, again, talk about housing, shelter, it's never about itself. But so they are being taken to camps until their period of observation is finished. And the conditions are like, they are not good. So in that sense, yes, there are different typologies that are emerging.
Yeah.
And those typologies are really the condition of camp. Let's say your food comes from outside and you have a bed and basic washer, and that's it. And you might be staying there for 21 days. You might be staying there for 7 days. And now with these new variants, you might also be staying there 28 days and even more. Macau is now making it 35 days. So it's becoming a proper, for the sake of a better word, proper, let's say, typology. And there's a lot of resistance, a lot of reaction, but there's also lack of trust, lack of communication. So it's creating a lot of issue. And there's a lot of frustration, So that's one. And then in terms of square meters, as far as I know, for regular housing, there is none. I know for migrant domestic workers, there are some regulations because the conditions can be really awful. So they are trying to regulate a little bit. So they at least suggest that the sleeping quarters should have a window and should have daylight and things like that. But it is hardly implemented, honestly. But for the public housing, as far as I know, there's not much. There's none. There's no standard. But this is something that I would like to check further, and maybe I can actually email you guys to the person who is asking as well.
Yeah, no, it's crazy how COVID creates all these new measures of controlling private space and raising this very thin already line between private and public spaces, and invasion into our privacy has increased largely also. So I think many governments are coming up with new measures that kind of reduce this feeling of privacy and also feeling of safety, even though these measures are sort of aimed at increase of our safety as a society. So there's lots of questions, I think, to these measures and issues and new forms of control, of course.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Merve, thank you very much. It's been extremely interesting, and I will I think watch your presentation again, because there were some details that I want to come back to, and for us it was also quite new context, and we learned a lot today. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. And within our program, we really try to put into display different positions, knowledge from different fields, but processes that connected to housing as well. And we try to look at it from very many angles, not only from economical, social, but also from a question of gender, from a question of social class, different physical and mental conditions. So that's being quite a journey, which we started in the second half of December last year. So we try to conduct about 2 presentations every month, and so far we've been having 10.
Yeah. So, like you said, housing is not only about housing. I think that's the motto could be the motto of this discussion series. So thank you very much, and good luck with all your further projects that are super exciting, even though the topic can be very harsh sometimes, but what to do, we still have to move on.
No, exactly. Thank you so much for inviting me. Really, it's really good, because I've been thinking about this topic a lot, so I think it's also helping me to shape my argument better. So so this has been another step for me. So yeah, I mean, and exactly like you said, it is it's not easy, but we also have to deal with it, right? So yeah. Thanks a lot. Great to meet you.
Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch, and good to meet you too.
Yes.
Okay.
Take care.